Welcome to Sonara's Deep Dive.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today, it's a deep dive into some of the most enduring and complex ideas in modern esoteric philosophy.
And definitely some of the most controversial.
Absolutely. We're talking about that ancient spiritual conflict, the one that's often just, simplified down to the duality of the lodges.
We're really peeling back the layers on a cosmic drama. It's the forces of light versus the forces of darkness. But we need to move beyond, the simple good guys and bad guys trope.
Right.
When we start talking about the Great White Brotherhood and the Black Lodge, especially in the context of Theosophy and, of course, the huge body of work from Alice A. Bailey, we're talking about something else. We're talking about two spiritual currents that, according to these sources, define the entire structure, the entire trajectory of human evolution.
Exactly. And you, the listener, you came to this deep dive for clarity. So before we even begin to tackle Bailey's comprehensive writings or their connection to the New Age, or even how they accidentally fueled modern conspiracy theories.
And they really did.
We have to build a rock-solid foundation. We need to answer the basic questions first. What is the Black Lodge? What does its core philosophy actually symbolize? What is its ultimate goal? And how does it stand in, direct philosophical opposition to its counterpart, the Great White Brotherhood?
This is a deep dive into spiritual governance.
Yeah.
It's about trying to understand the hidden machinery, the spiritual politics, if you will, that are said to dictate the flow of human consciousness.
Wow, spiritual politics. I like that.
It's an exploration of existence itself, really, as defined by two fundamentally different approaches to power, to progress, and ultimately to liberation.
That sounds like a heavy mission, but it feels absolutely necessary for context. So let's start at the very beginning. Let's define the nature of this duality.
Let's do it.
When you hear the term lodge in these esoteric texts, I think a lot of people's minds immediately jump to, secret rooms, strange buildings with rituals happening inside. We need to reset that expectation right from the start.
We do. That's the first hurdle. Fundamentally, a lodge isn't a building. It's not a place you can find on a map.
So what is it?
It's a collective, a spiritual sect, a philosophical school of thought, or on a higher level, an organized group of highly evolved, or in the case of the Black Lodge, highly advanced spiritual entities.
Advanced, but not necessarily evolved in the same way.
Precisely. They are organizational realms of influence and consciousness, and they operate on planes that are far, far subtler than our physical world. They represent a kind of crystallized spiritual alignment, a choice that has been made and solidified.
But we do see that meaning start to soften a bit or, blend when these ideas jump into popular culture.
Oh, definitely.
When a concept like the Black Lodge shows up in, say, a show like Twin Peaks, the idea begins to morph. It becomes both a physical place, like the Red Room or the fireman's home, and the philosophical group that's associated with that space.
Right. The place becomes a symbol, a shorthand for the state of being.
Yeah.
And that's a useful cultural shorthand. It helps us grasp it. But for this discussion, the foundation has to be that duality of organized spiritual energy.
Okay, so let's focus on that. We have the two sides.
On one side, you have the Great White Lodge, or the Great White Brotherhood. This represents the constructive, enlightened spirits who are focused on group consciousness. Their entire aim is the evolution of the whole planet, not just a single part of it.
And on the other side?
In direct opposition, you have the Black Lodge, or the Black Brotherhood. They represent the destructive opposing forces, and their entire focus is on egoism, on separation.
What I find so striking in the source material is this perspective that the duality itself, this light versus dark, good versus evil, it isn't presented as a flaw in the system. It's more like the default setting, the operating system.
That's a great way to put it. It's described as the programming language of existence.
Programming language.
Exactly. Dualistic reality is just the nature of our experience on this plane. You can't define up without down. You can't know what light is without a concept of dark. The duality itself isn't subject to a moral judgment.
But the choice within it is.
That's where the conflict arises. The direction of our will within that dualistic framework, that's where the moral and spiritual battle is fought. And the lodges, they represent the ultimate crystallization of those two possible choices.
And this choice, the one that separates these two brotherhoods, it's laid out so clearly in the sources. It breaks down across three specific areas: ego and will, their methods, and their ultimate fate.
Right.
I feel like if we can really understand these technical differences, we can grasp the essence of the Black Lodge. So let's start with the will. How does the Black Lodge's intense focus on the ego define its entire path?
Well, for the White Lodge, the goal of the will is alignment with universal or soul purpose. It's the idea that the individual ego has to subordinate itself to the greater planetary current.
So realizing you're a part of something much, much bigger.
A part of a vast, evolving whole, and you can't be separated from it. The Black Lodge takes the exact opposite route. Their path is one of egoic, self-deification, and isolation.
Self-deification, so making yourself into a god.
Your own god. They turn the will completely inward, making the isolated personality, the individual self, the absolute center of all purpose, all power, and all devotion. Its ambition taken to its absolute spiritual extreme.
And what's the immediate consequence of that for a spiritual seeker who goes down that path of radical isolation?
The consequence is, well, it's a catastrophic stagnation. If the ego refuses to align with the greater whole, it just builds this massive barrier around itself. The texts call it the isolated personality.
The spiritual dead end.
That's what it is. It prevents the seeker from ever passing what's known as the dweller on the threshold, which you can get into more detail on later. But essentially, it's a glorious, self-centered, and total failure.
Okay, so that's the will. Now let's talk about their methods, because this seems to tie directly into how black magic is actually defined in this esoteric framework.
It does. Completely. The White Lodge's methodology is all about harnessing the greater Deva builders.
Okay, you have to break that down. Deva builders. What are we talking about here?
Think of them as the living consciousnesses. The energies, the qualities, even the entities that build and structure all of matter and form across every plane of existence. The forces of nature, but intelligent and hierarchical.
So the White Lodge works with the higher level ones, the greater Deva builders.
Yes, they work with the soul aspect of these energies. They're working at the blueprint level to make sure that all of construction, all of evolution, aligns with the greater planetary plan.
So these Deva builders are kind of split into a higher spiritual aspect and a lesser, more material aspect.
That's a perfect way to think about it. The greater builders work on the subtle, causal planes, the blueprint level, as you said. But the Black Lodge naturally flips this entirely on its head. Their methods are defined as the manipulation of the lesser Deva builders.
And the lesser Deva builders are the ones that govern form and matter. So how does that manipulation become what we call black magic?
Black magic in this system is defined precisely as the manipulation of those denser, lower energies, the energies of the physical, the emotional, and the concrete mental bodies for purely selfish ends.
So it's power over matter for the sake of the self.
For the magnification of the separated self, yes. And the source material is very clear about the danger here. It warns that this kind of manipulation, when it's divorced from any soul purpose, leads to the tearing of the planetary web.
The planetary web, that sounds bad.
It's why their conflict isn't just a moral one, it's a structural one. They are, in essence, damaging the very fabric of existence itself to achieve their aims.
Wow, okay, that makes the distinction incredibly clear. One side works with the soul's blueprint, the other just ruthlessly exploits the material building blocks.
That's the core of it.
So finally, considering that methodology, what is the ultimate fate? What happens to those who follow the Black Lodge path to its conclusion?
Well, the White Lodge is aiming for the achievement of the planetary plan, the eventual liberation of all consciousness into a state of group unity. The Black Lodge path, however, it leads inexorably to self-destructive consequences. The texts call it the rebounding blow.
The rebounding blow, like a kind of cosmic karma.
Exactly. When you direct the will so selfishly against the natural flow of evolution, the universe has a very painful way of correcting itself. The isolated energy that you've built up eventually just returns to destroy the container it was meant to sustain.
And this self-destruction, it isn't just a spiritual thing, right? The sources make a direct, very tangible link to chaos in our society.
Yes, and this is the crucial link for us. This is where it stops being abstract. The failure of the Black Lodge path, this spiritual tearing, it manifests directly in the physical, mental, and social fields of humanity. They state very clearly that the increase in issues like insanity, endemic disease, and crime, are direct consequences of this internal spiritual conflict playing out on a mass scale. It's the result of the pressure of all that unaligned egoic force within the collective consciousness.
So it moves the conflict from some far-off spiritual realm straight into observable, everyday human suffering.
Precisely.
Okay, so let me try to summarize this foundation for you, the listener. The Black Lodge is a collective philosophical alignment. It's based on an isolated, deified ego. It employs manipulative magic that's focused ruthlessly on matter and form. And this results in a self-destructive feedback loop that destabilizes planetary life and feeds social decay.
That's a perfect summary.
Okay. Now let's see this philosophy operating in the world.
Let's.
Building on that philosophical definition, the core conflict is often framed as this struggle between form and life. And the Black Lodge is said to embody the forces of matter, or the lords of form. How does this dedication to form translate into real-world action and resistance to change?
A dedication to form means a dedication to the preservation of the material status quo.
The way things are right now.
The way things are. This includes the physical body, established political systems, economic systems, all the structures that have become crystallized and are now resistant to change. The energy of the Black Lodge is fundamentally reactionary.
So their ultimate goal is to hold back evolution.
To hold back the evolution and the liberation of human consciousness by trapping it inside the existing material vessel, the existing forms.
And their power, it's often stimulated by what the texts call the will to power. We have to distinguish this, though, from just simple, everyday ambition. This is something else.
Oh, absolutely. Simple ambition might drive a politician to seek office, maybe to do some good. The Black Lodge's will to power is a spiritual force. It's the force that drives a totalitarian regime to seek complete and total domination over physical resources, over territory, over the very bodies of human beings.
And not for any ethical advancement.
Not at all. It's for the glorification of that specific form and its isolated authority. The struggle is always between the spiritual force that's trying to lead us to liberation and the material force that is trying to imprison the human spirit inside the cage of form.
And this isn't just a passive resistance to change. The sources describe the Black Lodge as organizing itself to actively interfere in human affairs. So how do these high-level entities actually exert their influence on the world stage?
They're said to work through obsession and ultimately possession. The source material claims they organize themselves to obsess and ultimately possess negative individuals and groups who are already open to that will to power on the physical plane.
No, we have to be impartial here and just report what the sources claim.
Yes, very important.
They explicitly state that the forces of evil exploited the world situation in the 20th century and, quote, obsessed the German people and directed the Japanese people during World War II. That is an incredible claim.
It's a staggering claim. The idea that this massive geopolitical catastrophe was actually the physical manifestation of a spiritual struggle. That's the level we're operating on here.
And their operational techniques for influencing the masses, they feel startlingly relevant today, even though these texts were written decades ago, before our modern media landscape.
Their techniques are essentially tools of informational and psychological warfare. It's all there. They use psychology to achieve their ends, targeting human, emotional, and mental weaknesses.
And critically, mass media.
Critically. They utilize the press and radio, which were the contemporary communication networks, to distort human thinking. And the texts are specific about how they do it.
Ow!
By presenting half-truths, by imputing false motives to their opponents, and by fostering ancient prejudices and hatreds, stirring the pot of division.
It sounds like the deliberate creation of confusion and division on a massive scale, which brings us back to those esoteric concepts of glamour, Maya, and illusion.
Exactly. The mass distortion created by these techniques is just the external manifestation of glamour, Maya, and illusion on a planetary scale.
Can you break those three down for us again?
Of course. Glamour is the emotional fog. It's the collective fear, the hate, the emotional reactivity that prevents clear thought. Illusion is the mental misinterpretation, the fixed, false idea or dogma that traps the mind. And Maya is the physical, concrete misinterpretation, believing that the appearance of the physical world is the entire reality.
Can you give us a practical example, something to make that less abstract? How do these deceptions actually manifest in, say, daily life or politics?
Certainly. A common glamour, one the Black Lodge allegedly exploits, is the glamour of national superiority. This leads to intense jingoism, right? The emotional fog of patriotism becomes so thick that individuals can no longer see the ethical implications of their own nation's actions.
Okay, that's the glamour, the emotional fog. What's the illusion tied to that?
The corresponding illusion might be the fixed mental idea that our way of life is the only correct way of life. This completely prevents any critical self-assessment or any willingness to compromise. The Black Lodge simply works to reinforce these separations, these walls between people.
It really sounds like an ancient repeating conflict. The sources mention that the Atlantean civilization faced a very similar crisis between these lords of form and the Great White Lodge.
The Atlantean conflict is presented as both a historical precedent and a dire warning. The story goes that the dedication to material aspiration and the lines between the two schools of thought became so sharp that a great war erupted.
A spiritual war that became physical.
Exactly. According to the sources, the forces of light, seeing the immense spiritual peril to the entire planet caused by this crystallization of materialism, they intervened externally. They precipitated a culminating catastrophe.
The Great Flood.
The legendary Great Flood. This event, as the story goes, destroyed those who were dedicated to pure material power. But it salvaged a small, ethically sound minority who then became the seed for our current root race.
So it demonstrates that the spiritual conflict can and has manifested as world-changing physical destruction.
That's the warning, yes.
So if the Black Lodge represents this colossal force of material resistance on the world stage, the spiritual seeker must also face this same opposition, but internally. Is that where the dweller on the threshold comes in?
That's precisely it. The dweller is the summation of everything we've just discussed, but viewed from the individual's perspective. It is the ultimate obstacle on the path.
What is it, exactly?
It's the accumulated weight of all of an individual's selfishness, all of their personal glamours, all the illusions they've entertained, not just in this life, but across all their lives. It is the full, isolated personality, crystallized and completely resistant to the idea of merging with the soul.
So it's literally facing the sum total of your own mistakes and your own self-deceptions.
All at once. The dweller represents the culmination of that isolated personality. And if the seeker fails to pass this threshold, if they shrink from confronting the reality of their own accrued negative forces, they face what the texts call spiritual stagnation.
So the goal is to merge this resistant personality with what?
With the angel, or the soul. And this requires a conscious, incredibly arduous process of decrystallization and gaining control over the innate tendency of matter to separate and isolate itself.
Okay. We've now established a very clear picture of the Black Lodge. Its motivation is egoism, its method is the manipulation of matter, and its consequences, both global and personal, are social decay and spiritual stagnation.
A pretty clear picture, I think.
Now let's turn to the primary architect of this modern cosmology, Alice Bailey, and the comprehensive plan of what she calls the hierarchy.
This is where the story gets much bigger.
The concepts of spiritual governance and this grand evolutionary purpose are just so deeply rooted in the work of Alice Bailey. She's perhaps the single most influential figure in moving this kind of esoteric theosophy into the public sphere. I mean, she essentially popularized the term New Age.
She really did. Alice Bailey, born in 1880, started her spiritual work after she moved to the U.S. and got involved with the Theosophical Society. But her influence absolutely exploded because of the unique way her work was produced.
The telepathic dictation.
The telepathic dictation. Between 1919 and 1949, she claimed to have written nearly 25 books that were telepathically dictated to her by a high-level master of wisdom, known at first simply as the Tibetan.
And this Tibetan master was later identified as Dion, or DK. Can you give us a sense of what this telepathic process was supposed to be like? I mean, this wasn't just simple channeling, was it?
No, Bailey described it as a highly scientific, purely mental process. She acted as a clear mental intermediary. Dion would hold the entire thought pattern, the whole blueprint of the teaching, in his mind.
Like a huge data file.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And she would then have to translate and transcribe that massive thought form into concrete English, a process that took years. She claims she often had no prior knowledge of the subject she was writing about. She's just a spiritual stenographer for the hierarchy.
And this body of work, this ageless wisdom, as she called it, detailing this comprehensive system, led her and her husband, Foster Bailey, to found the Lucis Trust in 1922. Which brings us to a major point of controversy that critics often seize upon.
You're referring to the organization's original name.
Lucifer Publishing Company.
Yes, this is often leveraged by detractors as the definitive proof of a sinister, even satanic agenda. They use it to link Bailey's White Lodge directly to the very Black Lodge forces she wrote about.
So we have to report impartially on her explanation for this choice. How did her followers justify using the name Lucifer?
They always emphasize the Latin root, lucis, which means of light. Lucifer, in its original pre-Christian context, simply means light bringer or morning star.
Like Venus.
Like Venus. For Bailey, the name symbolized the necessary function of bringing enlightenment, illumination, and knowledge, the gnosis, to humanity. A bit like Prometheus bringing fire to mankind. The name was meant to convey spiritual clarity, the very opposite of ignorance and materialism.
But the public relations of it were difficult.
A massive headache. Given the very strong modern association of Lucifer with Satan, the name was quickly changed to Lucis Trust to avoid what she recognized was a huge and unnecessary distraction from the work itself.
Right. So regardless of the name, the purpose of the Lucis Trust was to disseminate this wisdom. They set up organizations like the Arcane School and World Goodwill, which are still active today and openly support things like international understanding and the United Nations.
They do.
But let's look at the structure they claim to represent, the hierarchy. Who are these beings?
The hierarchy is the planetary hierarchy. It's the organizational core of the Great White Lodge. It's composed of adepts and masters of the wisdom. These are beings who have already perfected their human evolution and have moved on into what's called the Kingdom of Souls.
And they include famous figures from Theosophy.
Yes, revered figures like Master Moria and Kuthumi, and of course Dishwal himself. Their role, as described, is the conscious, continuous guidance of the human race as a collective. They're like the elder brothers of humanity.
And what's their main focus today? According to Bailey's writings, what's the current project?
Their primary mission right now is what's called the externalization of the hierarchy. The idea is that the mental attention of the masters and the Christ is intensely focused on human affairs at this moment in history.
Why now?
They're preparing to break their long silence and potentially appear later among men. This would mean the guiding elder brothers of the race would physically manifest and publicly inaugurate the next phase of human evolution and spiritual training.
And central to this externalization is the Christ office. We have to be really clear here that Bailey's concept of the Christ is very, very distinct from the historical figure of Jesus.
Absolutely. This is a key point of misunderstanding. The Christ, or the world teacher, sometimes identified as Maitreya, is an office within the hierarchy. It's a role. It represents the embodiment of the love principle of deity.
So what was Jesus's role in this, then?
Jesus Christ, according to Bailey, was a high-level disciple who temporarily allowed the Christ energy to flow through him for his mission. The current Christ is the head of the hierarchy, and his reappearance is meant to demonstrate divinity for all of humanity and complete the work of ushering in this new era of spiritual development.
So all this spiritual governance, the masters, the Christ, the lodges, it's all working towards a final, definitive purpose, the plan.
The plan, yes. The plan is the teleological goal of evolution. Bailey insists that evolution is not random. It has a unified, goal-oriented purpose that's based on this ageless wisdom.
And the goal for humanity within that plan.
For man, the goal is group consciousness. This is achieved by integrating the entire personality, the physical, emotional, and mental bodies, and getting control over that form so that it serves the purpose of the spirit, not the other way around.
How is this group consciousness different from, say, just being a functional collective society? It sounds similar on the surface.
It's profoundly different. Group consciousness isn't just cooperation. It's a state of integrated, non-isolated awareness. It means you feel the pain and you experience the joy of the collective as intensely as you would your own. It is the complete negation of that egoic self-deification we talked about.
And this involves the development of a new race.
A new race, yes, but not defined by physical genetics. It's defined by spiritual maturity, a race that expresses group qualities and consciousness and idealistic vision. They would operate from a synthetic understanding of life, moving past the narrow focus of national or individual self-interest.
It sounds like a slow process.
Immensely slow and deliberate. It apparently involves the gradual disappearance of what the texts call very low-grade human bodies, which are supposedly incapable of holding the accelerating spiritual vibration needed for this new consciousness.
This is a massive, generations-long spiritual agenda for the entire planet. But it's precisely this vision of a unified, guided, global evolution that critics seize upon. This is what transforms the hierarchy's plan into a dark conspiracy.
And this is where the two narratives collide.
Bailey's vision requires structures that go beyond national sovereignty. Her organizations actively promote global unity. They support bodies like the United Nations and concepts like economic sharing and religious unity across the whole planet.
The mantra she shared back in 1937, the Great Invocation, is a perfect encapsulation of this globalist aspiration. It's a powerful prayer that's shared worldwide, and it expresses the need for light and love to stream forth, for the return of the Christ, and for men to act in accordance with God's plan.
And it climaxes with that plea.
And may it seal the door where evil dwells, which is the White Lodge's direct, public mandate against the Black Lodge.
And she didn't shy away from naming the ultimate structure for this plan. She envisioned a new world order, one that would solve all the planet's major conflicts, racial, economic, governmental, and religious.
This NWO was supposed to be founded upon the law of love and goodwill, established through what she called right educational processes. Her texts predict a necessary global economic adjustment, where the principle of sharing would completely supersede the principle of competition.
Which means what, practically?
Crucially, she argues that major material resources, oil, minerals, food supplies, must be owned and controlled by a governing international group to ensure equitable distribution and planetary stability.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Because Bailey's vision of a unified hierarchical system guided by a spiritual elite, well, it is the very definition of the conspiracy theory it later inspired.
It's the ultimate paradox. The New World Order conspiracy theory posits a secretive, malevolent power elite, the cabal, the deep state, the Black Lodge equivalent, conspiring to impose an authoritarian one-world government that strips away individual freedoms and national sovereignty.
So from the perspective of external critics, the people who believe in that conspiracy, how do they view Bailey's White Lodge mandate?
They see the White Lodge's stated goals as completely indistinguishable from the Black Brotherhood's alleged totalitarian agenda.
The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
That's their argument. If a small, self-appointed group of masters dictates global economic structures, educational processes, and political unity, regardless of how benevolent their intent is claimed to be, critics see that as an authoritarian, non-democratic imposition. The White Lodge mandate for global governance, in their eyes, is the NWO plot. It's the ideological cover for the final control mechanism of the Black Lodge forces.
To really understand the intensity of this overlap, we have to impartially report on some of Bailey's most controversial geopolitical claims, the ones that explicitly link this spiritual war to 20th century history.
Bailey and J. Walcool were absolutely uncompromising about the forces they saw working against the plan. As we mentioned, the forces of evil were explicitly identified as exploiting the world situation. They claimed the war wasn't just physical, it was a battle against the mental potency of these forces of evil. And she was clear that sealing that door where evil dwells required a power far beyond ordinary human effort. It required spiritual intervention.
And she also made some stunning claims about the use of atomic energy, which really sets her apart from a lot of other pacifist spiritual movements.
It does. She saw atomic energy as profoundly significant, not just technologically, but spiritually. She claimed that the release of the atomic bomb was a potent initiation for matter itself, mirroring the kind of initiations that liberate human souls.
That's a shocking perspective.
And even more controversial, she supported the use of atomic weapons by the United Nations to enforce the outer forms of peace.
To use atomic bombs for peace.
Her argument was that this incredible energy, if it was harnessed by the forces of light, was a necessary tool to quickly destroy old, entrenched reactionary forms. It would necessitate a new, globalized economic structure based on sharing, because the old one would be obliterated.
The audacity of claiming a spiritual rationale for weapons of mass destruction, that certainly intensifies the public perception of the hierarchy's methods.
To say the least.
But fundamentally, the hierarchy always claims to be fighting against totalitarianism.
They do. The core struggle is always framed that way by the hierarchy. The forces of light set their faces against totalitarianism, against selfishness, and against all that seeks to imprison the human spirit, the very principles of the Black Lodge. They see their plan for unified governance as a pathway to liberation, while the Black Lodge seeks unified control through crystallized form and fear.
And this vast, centuries-long plan is managed on a specific timeline, dictated by these massive spiritual meetings, the Great Conclaves.
These are the major milestones in the hierarchy's oversight of planetary affairs. They're said to occur roughly every 100 years.
Yeah.
For instance, the conclave held in 1725 is credited with catalyzing the Enlightenment.
How does an esoteric spiritual meeting generate the entire Enlightenment?
By stimulating the principle of mental development and individual rights. The hierarchy allegedly released specific mental energies into the collective consciousness that promoted rational thought, scientific inquiry, and the concept of inalienable rights.
Which led directly to
the American and French revolutions. Movements that were designed to shatter the crystallized, rigid forms of absolute monarchy and establish church authority.
Okay, so that was 1725. Then came the conclave of 1925.
That meeting's purpose was to stimulate the principle of relationship. And if you look at the timing, It coincided with a rapid acceleration of global communication technologies, radio, air travel, mass media. It was about shrinking the distances between people and establishing a true planetary network.
And 1925 is also when the most potent and apparently dangerous energy was released, the Shambhala force.
The Shambhala force is described as the pure energy of will or power. It resides on the highest spiritual plane and is immensely difficult for humanity to handle. Its release in 1925 had a terrifying dual effect.
What's that?
On one hand, it was necessary to dismantle the outdated, resistant old order. This led directly to the global crisis that immediately followed: the Great Depression, the rise of totalitarian ideologies, and ultimately World War II. It was the disruptive energy needed to break things apart.
And the other side of the coin.
On the other hand, it opened the door for the rapid construction of the new. It set the stage for global synthesis and the formation of organizations like the United Nations. Destruction and construction, two sides of the same powerful coin.
And the timing of this is crucial for anyone following Bailey's timeline, because the next major conclave is rumored to be set for 2025.
Correct. According to interpretations of the writings, the next meeting is intended to be highly preparatory and revelatory. It's supposed to finalize the practical steps for the externalization of the hierarchy. It could be the moment when the New Age program begins to visibly materialize on Earth.
And whether you interpret that as a great spiritual awakening or the final implementation of a totalitarian New World Order
Depends entirely on which lodge you believe is driving the vehicle.
The concepts of the black and white lodges, after passing through the crucible of Theosophy and Alice Bailey, have undeniably seeped deep into our modern consciousness. They provide a narrative framework for good, for evil, for hidden governance, whether you believe in their spiritual reality or not.
Their influence is visible everywhere, often stripped of the complex theological definitions we've been discussing. The clearest pop culture manifestation, I think we'd agree, is David Lynch and Mark Frost's Twin Peaks. The lodge duality is central to that entire universe, and it blends the esoteric origin with literal places and very tangible, frightening consequences.
In Twin Peaks, the Black Lodge, often shown as the Red Room, is essentially a gathering place for malevolent entities. It's a very literalized interpretation, blending concepts of hell, purgatory, and just a weird waiting room.
And their motivation is simplified, but it's still recognizable from the source material. These entities, like B.O.B. and the others, they require garmonbosia, which is described as pain and suffering, to sustain themselves.
So they feed on negative energy.
Right. It's the cultural echo of the Black Lodge's need to manipulate the lesser builders, to feed off the negative energy that's generated by human emotional and physical chaos. Their focus in the show isn't global economic control, but their goal is pure, destructive self-preservation through the consumption of human misery.
Which brings us back to the crucial question for you, the individual listener. So what does this all mean? If the Black Lodge is defined by the energy of separation and hate, and if it's actively working on the world stage, how does an aspiring spiritualist resist it without getting dragged down into the chaos?
This is maybe the most practical and essential insight from the entire body of work. The method of resistance is critical. If a seeker tries to fight the forces of the Black Lodge motivated by fear or hatred or even righteous anger, that emotional energy is instantly co-opted.
How so?
The Black Lodge feeds off the weapons you fire into them, metaphorically speaking, because that energy separation, division, hate is their native language. It's what they're made of.
So fighting evil with hate only serves to empower evil. True resistance, therefore, has to be defined by the opposite energy.
Precisely. The core instruction is to confront evil motivated by love and by adhering to unshakable moral structures. This is why so many ancient traditions emphasize these strict moral codes, like the historical codes of chivalry or Bushido.
To keep the warrior pure.
Exactly. Those codes provided the structure for being a warrior, for acting with force when necessary, while still maintaining a pure, morally sound foundation. It ensured that the action was aligned with the White Lodge's principles, not the Black Lodge's methods.
So for the spiritual aspirant today, the challenge is maintaining that vertical connection to the vision of the soul while you're working down here on the turbulent physical plane, the plane that's being agitated by the Black Lodge.
That interconnection is everything. The seeker has to avoid what the texts call overstimulation of the personality vehicles.
What does that mean?
It means if a disciple focuses too intensely on personal spiritual fireworks or dramatic inner experiences, they can actually become less effective in the world. They can burn themselves out or, even worse, become magnets for glamour and illusion. Instead, the focus has to remain externalized on the welfare of humanity and the conscious, dedicated practice of what's called the science of purification.
The science of purification or decontamination. Tell us more about that. How does one decontaminate themselves against the energies of the Black Lodge?
It's an active, threefold process. First, it requires the seeker to recognize the specific tainted area or the hidden evil within themselves, whether it's an ingrained prejudice, which is an illusion, a destructive emotional habit, which is a glamour, or a physical attachment, which is Maya.
So, self-awareness first.
Step 1. Second, the seeker must use specific mantric usages and hierarchical formulas, these are spiritual techniques, to set loose energies that are designed to destroy those germs of evil within the self. This isn't passive meditation. The texts describe it as active spiritual surgery.
And the third step.
Third, they had to stabilize the purified form. The constant goal is clarity of being, lifting the quality of your own personality life onto higher levels of awareness. This ensures that you can function as a clear, non-isolated instrument of the White Lodge's plan, rather than becoming a magnet for the Black Lodge's destructive energies.
That brings us full circle. We've established the Black Lodge as this philosophical manifestation of isolating egoism, this dedication to material form, whose methods involve the manipulative use of the forces of matter.
And this stands in direct active opposition to the hierarchy's plan for a synthetic group, consciousness, and goodwill. A plan managed through specific spiritual principles and these long centennial timelines.
It remains a profound and expansive and a deeply controversial model for viewing all of human history and all of human conflict.
Viewing it all as an orchestrated spiritual drama between two ancient, opposing, and incredibly powerful schools of thought.
And as we close this deep dive, let's leave you with a final provocative thought, one that's rooted directly in the source material we've discussed. The Black Lodge's ultimate fate is described as self-destructive consequences and the causation of physical, mental, and social decay. Given the intense global polarization we see today, the increasing difficulty in discerning truth from distortion, and the mounting social issues we all face, is the current state of society evidence that the war between these two spiritual factions is ongoing, and perhaps that it's being fought primarily through the collective minds and emotions of humanity itself, determining whether we as a species ultimately choose separation or synthesis.
Thanks for tuning into Sonara's Deep Dive. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss any of our future episodes. I bring you fresh content every week. Thanks for listening.